Welcome to the second session of our In Search of Jesus series. Let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, just thank you for this time together. We ask that you would send your Holy Spirit and let him open our eyes and open our ears, Father. Make us sensitive to your word and just show us where your Son is hidden and displayed in each page of the Bible. Father, just now lead us and guide us, bind the powers of the enemy. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, quick recap, class 2. But the goal of the class is twofold. The first, can we close the doors so we don't get that whine in here? Yeah. The first goal is to find Jesus. There are those that believe Jesus is actually somehow in each of the verses of the Bible. I think that would be great if we could find them all. But I do believe he is in every book of the Bible, possibly every chapter of the Bible. And I'd like to find him in as many of the verses as possible. He has different ways he is revealed. He's revealed in prophecy. He's revealed in similitudes where he is a picture of something. And we're also going to be looking for Bible codes as a way. Now, last week, I mentioned that I wanted you to have confidence in the Bible. One of the ways we have confidence in the Bible is that we have proof that God wrote it. It's one thing to say God wrote the Bible, that's why it's important. But what do you say when a non-believer challenges this? Well, I don't believe God wrote the Bible. Now, when I approach the Bible from a little bit different standpoint than other people. I look at the Bible as a legally binding contract between God and man. Now, how do you know a contract is valid? I worked in the insurance industry for 45 years, and it would be possible for people to print up fake insurance policies. And there was a whole thing of insurance fraud where people claimed they were part of an insurance company and they weren't, and they stole your money. So how do you know that this is a valid insurance policy? The way you know is that it has to be signed by a proper representative of the insurance company. Now, when I was working in fraud, it was very important that we would have people sign documents, quote, under penalty of perjury. That means if they lied in that document, we could file fraud against them in court. So, in order to sign something under penalty of perjury, you have to use what's called a wet signature, or as we would refer to it, pen to paper. Somebody physically signs it. So that means you cannot use a name stamp, because somebody other than the person making that declaration could use the name stamp. And you cannot use a computer-generated signature, because somebody other than the person making that statement could put that signature on the document. There has to be something that is unique that no one else can do to prove that it was signed and that it's valid. Now, back in the ancient days, and again, this was before me, you had what was called a signet ring. And the king would have a ring that had his official seal on it. And whenever something was signed, they would have a little bit of sealing wax, and he would impress the signet ring into wax. And when nobody else had that signet ring, theoretically. So that was how they proved it. Well, for our case, God signed the Bible. And he signed it through prophecy, and he signed it through Bible codes. So when I come to the Bible, we're not talking about religion. You have the right to believe whatever you want to believe about God, the universe, or anything else. That also means you have the right to be wrong. So what we're going to be doing is looking at contract and contract law, because it doesn't matter what you believe, when it comes to contract and contract law. If you do not believe the right thing, too bad, so sad. You can have a situation where you think it's okay to drive 85 miles an hour down the residential neighborhood. You may find yourself confronted by a police officer that says, sorry, you can't do that. Well, I believe I have the right to drive as fast as I want to. You have the right to believe that. But that does not mean you're right. And you'll be standing in front of a judge and he says, yes, you may think you have the right to drive 85 miles an hour, but this is what the law says. And the law will prevail over this. So when we come to this, we're looking, the Bible is our final authority. And I want you to realize that God signed this Bible using prophecy, using Bible codes to prove that He and only He could sign it. Now, one of the things we talked about last week, and again, let me just kind of touch on the rules for the class, because we're not going to be having time at the end of the class for questions and answers, because we got to be done at 5 to 9. So we're doing this differently, and if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense, if you hear something or see something that has an interesting point, or you have a good question or something, we'll stop and do the questions and answers during the lecture. And it may take us 6 weeks to get through one verse. But if there's a lot of good stuff in there, I want to hit the good stuff. I don't want to be missing things over. So we're going to be very relaxed and very informal in here. So one of the things I was talking about is that prophecy proves that God wrote the Bible. He said in Isaiah that I am going to show you the end from the beginning. I'm going to declare something and I'm going to make it happen. Now, when you look at prophecy, and in one of our classes, we were looking at the prophecy just in Ezekiel, dealing with the city of Tyre. And the city of Tyre had this 4 or 5 prophecies that God was going to do something to it. Now, one of them was that, oh, Babylon is going to attack Tyre. Well, gee, that's a given. Look at the newspaper. Babylon's going out and attacking everybody around them. The odds are 1 in 4 they're going to hit Tyre, because there's north, south, east, and west directions available. So that's a 1 in 4 odd of it being right. That's not too impressive. So then it says that they're going to basically take the city, but they're not going to profit. Okay, maybe 1 in 2, you take it, you don't take it. But then it kept getting more and more elaborate, and Ezekiel actually said that the city was going to be taken, that they were going to take all the debris of the city, and they were going to throw it in the ocean. And then they were going to scrape all the dirt off the ground and throw that into the ocean. And that Tyre would no longer be inhabited, and they would use it for drying their nets. It's pretty precise. And we found that when Alexander the Great came in and he tried to take Tyre, he couldn't get to it because it was now moved to half a mile offshore on a small island. And he tried to use boats, he tried to get to it, he couldn't get to it. So he goes back and he orders his men to tear everything down from the original city that was left. And they threw it all into the ocean. And they built a causeway from the shore out to the island. They scraped all the dirt off the ground and filled in the causeway. And his army marched across that causeway, took the city of Tyre, destroyed it. It has never been inhabited since then, and the fishermen use that as a good place to dry their nets. The odds of that happening, when we were looking at it, and math is not my strong point, but they said if you could take the earth and cover it 1 foot deep in silver dollars, and take 1 silver dollar and paint it red, and drop it in there and mix it up, that would just be the beginning of the calculation. You would then take 1 million of these earths, but only one silver dollar painted red, and fill them in a sun. And then you take 27 suns and fill them with 1 million earths each, all covered 1 foot deep in silver dollars. And out of all of those millions and billions and trillions of silver dollars, only one had the paint on it. The odds of Ezekiel getting that right on his own was that possibility. It becomes absurd at some point. There's no way Ezekiel could have figured that out by himself. But when you bring in, God says, I will say it and I will make it happen, the odds always drop to 1 out of 1 for God. So prophecy proves that God said it. Then when you add the fact that he takes that prophecy and he puts it into a code, and the person writing that part of the Bible doesn't know that code is in there, that's a double signature. So you prove that God wrote the Bible. May have been put on paper by human beings. God may have inspired them in how to do it. But the rabbis believed that when Moses was up on Mount Sinai for those 40 days and 40 nights, and God was giving him the law, they don't think that he was being given the law word for word. They believe that God literally gave the law to Moses letter by letter. And that is how this other code we talk about, we'll be talking about more in the future, called equidistance letter sequencing works. And this was rediscovered in the 1980s by a Jewish cryptographer. And he was using a little IBM 360 computer. He had broken the codes of the Japanese and the Germans during World War II for the Allies. And so he took the entire book of Genesis and he removed all the vowels, because Hebrew does not have vowels in it originally. He took out all the spaces and all the punctuations. All he had was one very long list of letters in Hebrew. And he started the program saying, check every second letter, every third letter, every fourth letter, every fifth letter, every 6th, 10th, 20th, 50th, 100th, and see if there's any words encoded there. Well, the first word the computer found was the word Torah. So he went to Exodus, did the same thing with Exodus, and it had the word Torah coded at 50-letter sequence, the same as Genesis. He went to Leviticus, and Torah was not encoded. He went to Numbers, and Numbers had Torah encoded at 50-letter sequence, but it was written backwards. And then the same thing with Deuteronomy. Torah was coded there backwards at a 50-letter sequence. So we have Torah pointing forward, nothing, Torah pointing back, and Torah pointing back. So he redid the parameters in Leviticus, and the word he found was Yeshua, which is the Hebrew name for Jesus. Since that time, they have gone crazy. And there's a very good book that I could recommend called Cracking the Bible Codes. And that is available on Amazon. I don't get a kickback, so that's okay. It is written by Jews, not Christians. And there is an entire project in Jerusalem with these scholars, several of them Nobel Prize winners, that have come to Jerusalem and given up their careers, and are spending their entire life now trying to analyze this Bible code that they have discovered. One of the things that was so amazing about it is that they contacted the guy that had the little computer program, and he says, let's put this to the test. I think there was a list of maybe 25 or 30 prominent rabbis throughout the ages. And they gave him the list of these rabbis' names and either the date of their birth or the date of their death. And he says, let's see how good this code really is. And he ran the code, and every one of those rabbis' names was encoded in the Bible, and near it or intersecting it was either the date of their death or the date of their birth. That freaked everybody out. They gave him a second list, and every one of those rabbis was on there. So I suspect over in Revelation chapter 20, when people are being brought before the great white throne, and it says the books were open, I would not be surprised if the Bible does not have a lot of stuff encoded in there that God is going to pull up. So we're going to be looking at as we go forward. Okay, any questions or observations before we move on? All right, you're lucky. This is the first word of the Bible.
What's the name of that book again?
Cracking the Bible Codes. And there's a dozen books on Bible codes out there. They are all written by Christians. One of the things I really hate to bash Christians, we have terrible credibility. I mean, we hear something and we get excited and we go out and start sharing it everywhere. And it was back in the 1980s. We had K-Love, the Christian radio station. And we had the Christian disc jockey, Rich Bueller. And I was, listening to as we came home from work one day, and he's saying, okay, everybody is talking about this check. And he says, we've been hearing for years that some people received their disability check or their state retirement check or whatever, and on that check it had imprinted, do not cash unless you have the mark of the beast. Whoa! And according to the story, somebody called the agency and says, what's this all about? Oh, we're sorry, that's a mistake. Those aren't supposed to be sent until later. And so Rich says, I'm putting the challenge out here. This has been going on for like 10 years. If you personally got that check, call me. And people flooded the phones all afternoon. Well, my cousin had a friend who, or somebody here did. And he says, did you personally see that check with that printing? And the final result was nobody had seen it personally. So I want you to have credibility when we talk about this. So Bereshit is an interesting word. In the Hebrew, it means beginnings. And that is the title of the Jewish book of the Bible, Beginnings, Bereshit. Now, Robert and I were talking before class, and he said that there was somebody who had done something on YouTube that it's not what you think. Genesis 1:1, it's not what you think.
I actually did not read it, so I just read
That was
the
kind
title.
of a title or something,
Yeah, which I'm really good at just reading because I discern rubbish off the bat.
I think that was Michael Heiser.
Might have been, but it says
It was Heiser's.
Oh, okay.
I didn't read it because it was like I didn't like what it said right off the bat.
And because it kind of challenged it, we're not talking about creation. And I said, well, actually,
No, it wasn't that.
if you look at the word Bereshit, we're not talking about creation. We're talking about Jesus. Now, for those who were not here last week, we have the handout, so grab a copy of
I'm
the
reading it
handout.
now, Margie. Next time I see it, I'll read it.
Listen to it, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And what we're going to be doing in here is looking at something called Paleo Hebrew. You may find out that we have Old English, we have Middle English, and we have Modern English. And if you've ever taken an English class and you tried to read Chaucer in the original language, you don't know what half those words are. Language changes, language evolves as you go forward. So, the Hebrew alphabet was not what it is today. And this little chart that I gave you shows you the letters and the sounds that it makes. Then you have the early, that's the column right here. That is Paleo Hebrew. And the Jews wrote in Paleo Hebrew up to the Babylonian captivity. So when Moses wrote the Torah, he wrote it using this alphabet in your second column. And you've got some other variations till you get to the modern Hebrew alphabet. So I'm going to be talking about Paleo Hebrew. And the thing about the Hebrew letters They are not just sounds. They are pictographs, meaning they represent a picture, and the picture is talking about a theme or a concept or a name. So let me just kind of pick it up, and we're going to look at John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Now, since I've done this research, I'm coming back and looking at John 1:1 with a different slant, a different perspective. This proves that Jesus is God. And when the cults say, oh, Jesus was a God, or Jesus was an angel, or Jesus was just a good man, John 1:1 cuts through all the garbage. In the beginning was the Word, and we find that later in John 1:14, the Word became flesh and dwelled among us. So the Word here is referring to Jesus. So in the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. Now, I don't know if he's going back and talking about the creation, or if he might be talking about the Hebrew word Breshit. Breshit, was Jesus. And Jesus was God, was with God, and Jesus was God. So let me just kind of walk you through here. So, what does Breshit look like in the Paleo-Hebrew? This is the Bet. That's the second letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And last week we did Aleph, which is the ox head, and then Bet, which was the tent. If you take Aleph, which means power, authority, head, and in some cases, God, and then you have Bet, which is a tent, which represents home, put those together and repeat them, and you get the Hebrew word Abba. And Abba is the Hebrew word for father. And I think it was Faye or something mentioned last week that actually that's a slang for endearment of daddy. So you look at those and you say, oh, head of the home. Authority, power over the house, that's father. So here we have Bet. Again, that's your B sound. Then comes the Resh. Now, the interesting thing about the Resh, it looks like a head. I mean, it must have been a real pain to write in Hebrew back then because of all the details. You had to draw pictures and everything. Well, Resh is referring to a person, and particularly person of importance or the first person. So whenever you see that, you take a look at it. Then we have Aleph again, the ox head. We have Shin, that looks like a pair of teeth. And then we have Yod, which looks like a forearm with a hand on it. So that is your Paleo-Hebrew spelling of the word Breshit. Again, this is a code. These are pictures, these are themes, these are concepts. So let's kind of take it apart and look at it a little bit more carefully. Oh, and Tav, I forgot Tav. So, here we go. We start with Bet, which means house or home. And we have Resh. Now this is the head, it's a person, first of importance. You put those two together and you get the Hebrew word bar. And bar means son or son of. In the New Testament, we have a reference in one of the Bible verses to Simon Bar Jonah. Well, Simon Bar Jonah means Simon, son of Jonah. They didn't have last names back then, so they had Bar and then they had the father's name to identify them. So, our first two letters are talking about the son, Bet, Resh, and now we're adding Aleph. Aleph, the ox head, is the head, it is power, it is God. So our first three letters of the Bible literally mean Son of God. Jesus is the opening word of the Hebrew Bible. And we don't know that because we don't know the Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. So this is a funny thing. Yeah. And I got my little thing.
Wait, there's more.
There's more, yes. Your ads on TV late at night. Some of us don't sleep at night like we're supposed to. We have the letter Shin, and it looks like teeth. And that's what it's supposed to because it means to consume or to destroy. And then you have that little thing of Yod, which looks like the forearm or a hand. And literally that means work or it means hand. Now the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Tav. And in the original Paleo-Hebrew, it's the shape of a cross. So it means covenant, it means a promise, or it can also mean the cross. So, here we go. The Son of God, and we add a few little words to make it flow, will be destroyed when his hands are nailed to the cross. Wow.
That's the word
Bereshit.
Bereshit.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And you can also kind of adjust and move things around. You know, God's Son will die when he does his work on the cross as promised. So as you're looking at these things, because they are not as precise as we would like, they're open to interpretation. And you'll find that there are those Jews that are freaking out because if this is true, Jesus is their Messiah. And they don't want to have to accept Jesus as the Messiah because they have spiritual blindness, as we talked about last week. So they will say, oh no, that's not what it means. And again, Hebrew is the perfect letter for this kind of code because they don't use vowels. They don't use A, E, I, O, U. You know, and you have to infer based upon the actual letters that you got. Let me take a little sidestep here. And there's an interesting Bible verse that all of you know, and it's in the last book of the Old Testament. So, in Malachi, chapter 4, verse 2. Here's the King James. But you who fear my name shall see the Son of Righteousness arise with healing in his wings. That's a nice promise. Well, here's the problem. When the King James translators were doing this, the guy that was translating this messed up. Because if you use shin and then meme and shin,